All right, welcome to another episode of the Yosemite Fit Show. I'm Brent and
I'm Steve Duggar.
Thanks for joining us again today. We've had some great positive feedback from our first two shows, and just really excited to keep this going and see where it evolves to. As always, before we actually start the show today, we're just going to do a quick reminder. The topics we discuss on this show are informational only. You should always seek the advice of your own doctors, trainers, nutritionists, and other healthcare providers about your individual needs. Neither the hosts nor any guests that we have on the show are liable for the use of any information presented on this program. Okay, once again, out of the way. Steve, missed you last week.
Yeah.
What have you been up to? How's your training going and everything?
Training's going pretty good. I've been, since I think we talked about it last time I was here, I've been really focused on kind of a bodybuilding style of training lately. And in particular, I've was heavily influenced by Dorian Yates, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
that was kind of my, the mid to late 90s. Dorian was the, Mr. Olympia and
Mr. Intensity.
right? Yeah. He's all about high intensity, and his kind of influenced Mike Mentzer and Arthur Jones. And I've really I've always kind of gravitated more to the high intensity side. So I've been really focused on that for about a year now. I'd like to keep doing that. It's been working out really well. I've seen some really good improvements and stuff. So yeah, so I follow his he wrote a couple of books, and then he's got his website and stuff, but his what he said was his kind of intermediate program that he ran for a few years right before he went pro.
Okay.
So I've been running that, and it ends up being about 4 days a week of lifting. And then I'll do, on those off days that I'm not lifting, I'll do some just real low intensity cardio sessions for about an hour.
Okay.
So it's been going really good. I really like it. Really enjoyed it. It's very, very taxing. So, those built-in rest days, and then I keep my cardio really, really low. So it's kind of a recovery,
A little recovery, active recovery, sometimes they call it.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
So yeah, other than that, spent some time with my family. So that was really nice.
Nice. Yeah.
My brother came out from Utah for a work thing, but then kind of made his way down to our area, and then ultimately flew back home and stuff. But it was good to see him. I don't get to spend enough time with him.
Always great to catch up with family. I went back and saw my daughter and her husband recently, and it was good to see them. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, and since it's funny, on our first episode, we both talked about a little bit how we're not really big cardio or big runner guys.
Yeah.
And
as it probably should.
Right. And then last week I went out and ran the 2.5 mile course for the Hornitos Indian Gulch Run.
Nice.
And so it was funny that we joked about that, and then I went and did that. I have never run more than a mile, and that was in high school when they made you run the 4 laps on the track to get your mile in.
Yep.
And so to me, for doing the 2.5 mile run, it was neat to see that I could do that I still had a good cardio base from all the cycling I used to do and everything. I was sore for 3-4 days afterwards in funny places.
Yep.
But yeah, that was in a twisted sort of way. It was kind of fun. And I'm actually signing up for the Paseo de Mariposa. I'm going to do the 5K course on that, which is coming up end of April as well. Nice. So maybe I've caught the running bug a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. My brother played soccer, and he was a runner. I was an aquatics guy. And I hear these stories about these alleged runners high.
Right.
I've never once gotten to that place. I don't know.
I always think maybe that's what, when I get those stitches in my side, maybe that's, they're feeling something different or something there, because, that's, But yeah, I managed to keep it going. I ran the whole course, 2.5 miles without stopping. So
Awesome.
that was my big fitness event
Awesome.
the last couple of weeks. Beyond that, been working on getting our website up, Yosemite Fit or Yosemite.fit, www.yosemite.fit. We're about 80% done. I've still got to get, a few more things up there and graphics, but all of the podcasts will be up there with show notes. So anything we talk about in the show here will be, I'll have links out there that you can go and find it time stamped. So, if we talk about something at, 10 minutes and 10 seconds in the show, you can find that at that time and follow right along as you're listening to the program or watching on YouTube or wherever else you might be getting this. So the podcast will be on there, but I've also got 2 other features that I've put on there. One's an upcoming events.
Yeah.
So if there's any fitness related events coming up in our area, and we'll try to talk about those at the end of the show, but you can always email those to me, show@yosemite.fit, and we can add that on there. Yeah, we're hoping to make it a great clearinghouse for, any events, runs, cycles, competitions, anything like that that's going on in kind of the Yosemite, Cathy's Valley, Mariposa, Oakhurst areas. And then a business directory as well. So if you are a personal trainer or fitness instructor, or you own a gym or a yoga studio, or any kind of, holistic wellness or massage or anything like that, that's about health, fitness, longevity, wellness in these communities, you can send that. We'll add you to our business directory as well, hoping to make that just a clearinghouse for all things. So anybody for either locals or anybody visiting the area can go and find, places and resources to stay fit and healthy while they're in our area. We're now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and very excited to announce that starting in April, we're going to be on the KRYZ radio show, twice a week. So stay tuned for more info on what days and times we're officially going to be on that radio station. But that should be coming out in April. So pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. That'll be new for me. So kind of exciting.
So we've had a lot of great feedback on the show so far. People that I've talked to, have been really positive. So, keep that coming, guys. We really appreciate that. But one of the things we did, get a little bit of feedback on was to be a little more focused. First couple episodes were great, but lots of topics. So we're going to try and focus and narrow these in a little more, and really have kind of one central topic. And so this week, I thought it'd be great to talk about strength or resistance training, especially for beginners, people, just getting started, and, some of the challenges that they might face trying to get started with any type of a strength or resistance program. And this was inspired by my daughter and her husband. She works for a college. And they have free access to use the gym there. And so they've been walking on the indoor track, for several months now. But when I was back visiting them, they kind of talked about wanting to start with some weight training, some resistance training, but they didn't know what to do. I mean, they see all the machines and the racks and everything, and they can kind of see what people are doing, but they didn't know what to do. They were kind of embarrassed to experiment on their own. It can be kind of intimidating, as somebody, who doesn't know anything or very little walking into a gym and trying to get started.
Yeah. I actually hear that quite frequently too, that people experience that intimidation or resistance to kind of getting started to weight training and lifting, the free weight section,
right?
That can be really daunting for a lot of people and stuff. And so, in fact, I just had this conversation with like 2 or 3 other people as well.
Okay.
Kind of ironically.
Right.
So
Topical.
Great topic to kind of dive into.
I mean, there's so much, strength or resistance training, there's equipment. So you can do body weight or calisthenics, push-ups, pull-ups, things like that. You can do free weights. There's, machines, there's kettlebells, there's bands, there's all these different types and pieces of equipment. And then, so once you've picked out your equipment, do you do bodybuilding, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, circuit training, what are these even? And then there's compound movements versus isolation exercises, and then sets and reps and different programs. It can really be kind of complicated, getting started. And overwhelming if you've never done it before. So our number one piece of advice on this is find yourself a personal trainer.
Yeah.
That's what they do, right? You can go in, you can tell them what your goals are, and they'll design a plan for you based on where you're working out, what equipment you have access to, and what your goals are, right? I'm sure you do that in your personal training.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the first things is going to be, learning how to do the movements and the exercises properly. One of the things that's kind of a holdover from my earlier CrossFit days, we used to talk a lot about consistency with form and technique first, and then so technique and then consistency and then intensity.
Okay.
So we want to see learning how to do this stuff, learning how to move properly, and then doing that consistently, and then we'll ramp up the intensity. And that could be, you can scale the intensity in a number of ways, whether that's weight on the bar, speed of the movement, et cetera. So there's different ways to scale all that stuff up. But first is just learning how to move, how to do the movement.
Right.
Those are all different. I look at them as all different tools.
Okay.
Right. So different tools in the toolbox, depending on what you're trying to do and stuff. And it can be overwhelming because you don't even know where to start, right. Who to ask and things like that. And there's an internet, I don't even know what you would call it. I guess influencer. I see him on, I think on Twitter the most.
Okay.
X,
which
that's probably my go-to.
Right.
X, but he's notorious. He said one thing, he calls out a lot of stuff and inappropriate behavior and stuff that people are doing in the gym and whatnot.
I may have seen this guy.
He's a big dude.
Yeah.
He's super, super fit. I don't know if he's fit actually, but he's big.
Okay.
and lean. So he looks good. And then, last time, one of the things he said was oftentimes the big guy or the super fit woman that's in the gym are some of the most approachable people.
Right.
Ironically, maybe you might feel intimidated because they've obviously been putting in work for a period of time and you're like, oh, they're judging me, or, they think I'm an idiot for doing stuff. And it's quite the opposite. A lot of times people who have been in the gym for a long time, when we see new people, I say we, because I guess I'm throwing myself.
Right. It's been into gym a long time too.
But we see new people come in and, the first couple of times you're kind of I'll see how it goes, whatever. And I'm not really paying attention because I'm focused on my own thing, as 99% of everyone is.
Right.
You're so focused on your own thing, you don't really pay attention. And then over time, it's coming in and you're like, all right, right on.
Uh-huh.
This person's giving it a go. They're coming in, they're showing up.
Maybe start giving a little head nod, when you see them in there, you're starting to connect a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And so I would, definitely, even if your plan is not to have a personal trainer for a long period of time, at least start with hiring a personal trainer for a period of time.
Right.
And a good trainer is going to kind of do an assessment, where are you, biologically, physiologically, and those kinds of things, movement based, see where you're at, how you move, and then kind of formulate a plan of okay, how often are you working out? How long can you spend in the gym each session, and so on. And then kind of develop a little bit, develop a macro plan and outline. Okay, this is kind of where we're starting. These are some intermediate goals, and then some long-term goals to work towards and stuff. But just learning how to do the movements. What does this machine do?
Right.
What muscle groups does this thing work, and how should I sit, and how should I move this thing or whatever.
Some of them can look like medieval torture devices. If you're just looking at them, it's what is this?
Some of them are so fancy. You're laying. You can lay in it and you kind of push your legs this way. Some of them are super fancy. But yeah, hiring a trainer is a great first start. Just tell them your goals, help them, understand your goals. I just want to learn how to do things.
Right.
And I look at it kind of like we were talking about our, the first podcast. I look at things like your first draft is not going to be good. Right. It's just not going to be good. And that's okay. And so going into the gym for the first time, or having it coming back into the gym after a long layoff, you're kind of coming back to a first draft.
Right.
And you're like, look, it's going to be trash and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm winging it, but that's okay. And just kind of having that beginner mindset of saying hey, look, the first go is going to be trash, but I'm, continuing to iterate and evolve and like make the adjustments and learn and continuing to learn and just having that like that gap, that space to give yourself a little bit of grace and say like, look, I'm a beginner.
Yep.
I'm starting in the beginning. And just like we all do, even the most high level athlete you can possibly imagine started at the beginning at some point.
Yep.
So, and they were terrible at it.
Right. Everybody starts somewhere, but
they're terrible.
But the nice thing is you can only go up from there. I mean, it's pretty positive. But if we just told people, all right, hire a personal trainer and that's it.
Yeah.
This will be kind of a short episode this week.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit more about a few other things, but I was going to talk about my experience in any gym that I've walked into, whether one's here. I mean, we were traveling, to Vegas, and I was using the gym at the hotel we were staying at and everything. And people are great. They can let you, work in if, a machine's taken. It's like, hey, you mind if I work in with you a little bit? I mean, most people are super friendly. They're just there to work out. They're not, judging anybody that's in there. In fact, people, a lot of times, people that maybe are really out of shape, feel like everybody's in there judging them and I mean, internally in their head, making fun of them a little bit or something. My experience has always been, I'm impressed with those people.
Yeah.
I admire them for being in there and trying to do the work on themselves.
Yep.
So that's my take. And most of the people that I talk to, about that issue, that's been their experience as well.
Yeah. Same. When I see new people coming in or somebody that, is overweight, out of shape, they haven't been taking care of themselves, and they're starting their journey and coming in and absolutely, like I celebrate that. You're like, dude, that's awesome that you're starting this journey and you're doing the thing. I know it's difficult. It's not easy. And absolutely, like sometimes, like when I'm watching somebody, they might feel like, that I'm judging, but I'm just kind of seeing their body mechanics and stuff. And I typically don't do that with somebody that's not my client. I'm watching, a client for specific things. And when somebody else comes in the gym, I always tell people this too. It's like everyone feels like they're being watched. So no one's actually watching each other. Right. Like, so everyone's so focused on, just about everyone's really focused on what they're doing, why they're there and their workout and stuff. And like, if everyone has an internal focus, no one's actually really looking externally at anybody.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. So you just, and the other thing I tell people too is like, look, you're a paying member of this gym. This is your gym.
Right. You've got just as much right to be there as anybody.
Exactly. Like this is your gym. So walk in. This is your room. This is your weights. This is your time. Do your thing. And just focus on that.
Right.
Which is obviously easier said than done sometimes, but
great. But yeah, it's and sometimes we need reminders of that too. If you've got a big guy next to you, obvious bodybuilder or somebody who's in great shape, it can be a little intimidating, but you have just as much right to be there as he. And again, he's probably not more worried about himself than, anything that you're doing. But if you did ask him, chances are, hey, how to do this or whatever.
Absolutely.
I mean, I always, I've had people ask me things and always jump in. And again, it's just always, let's help each other out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
People are people.
I will add this little caveat though.
Right.
If I'm in the middle of moving, doing the exercise, that's not the time to ask.
Good point.
So
good point.
So, but don't be afraid to ask,
right.
Like if I'm in between sets and I'm, in my little rest, taking a rest, or I'm just cruising around the gym or something, and you ask, like, hey, how do I do this, exercise? I'm like, oh yeah, I'll show you.
Right.
But if I'm in the movement, that's not, generally the time to ask. Yeah. So timing matters just a little bit.
Good point. Good point there, Steve. All right. So if you're looking at making improvements in your health, there's lots of things you can do. You can work on nutrition. Mm-hmm. You can do aerobic activity, work on getting better sleep, reducing your stress, and of course, strength or resistance training.
Yeah.
So all of those are important, but for me, strength training is like a keystone habit. So much else for me builds on there. There's so many benefits to it, right? I mean, there's, muscle and bone density, body composition. I mean, obviously, getting more fit and muscular always looks good. But muscle is an active tissue, so it has an impact on your metabolism.
Yep.
You'll burn more calories the more muscle you have. Might not be a lot, but, it depends on how much muscle. But versus like, most fat, which is an inactive tissue, it just sits in your body and doesn't do anything for you. The brain body connection, cognition, strength training, any kind of exercise, but strength training has been shown to have a good connection with brain health as well.
Yeah.
Neurogenesis, and of course, increased lifespan and health span. There was a study that just showed that no matter how much aerobic training you did, those people that did aerobic training but also did strength training at least twice a week had a lower all-cause mortality or risk of death than those who didn't.
Yeah.
No matter how much of a runner or cyclist or anything you were, just adding strength training a couple times a week, it really can help reduce your all-cause mortality. So boom, I'm sold.
Yeah. That's I want to really emphasize that piece because the studies have increasingly starting to show, and I think they've always kind of pointed to that, but like muscle mass and strength is without question a massive positive impact on not just like lifespan and all those things you just listed off, but quality of life too. Right. So like if Dr. Andy Galpin at Fullerton had an influence on me quite a bit. In fact, we'll talk about him a little bit later too. But he did an interesting little I forget exactly how he set up the study, but it was essentially like, if you walk up a flight of stairs and you're out of breath, was that a cardiovascular event or was that a muscular endurance event?
Right.
All right. And so kind of like the way I understood his research pointed out was like, that's primarily actually a muscular endurance event and specifically single leg strength. And so like as a predictor of longevity and a predictor of quality of life, your single leg muscular endurance is by far the biggest predictor. So the muscle mass and strength training is you just cannot get away from it. You have to load the body up and work under some stress, and you're going to see maximum benefits across the board in multiple facets of life. So
don't skip leg day.
Don't skip leg day.
You will appreciate it when you're 80 or 90 years old. But yeah, that was really an incredible study and really something to think about. A lot of people do think, I'm winded, going up this flight of stairs, but it doesn't mean that, you don't have great cardio or anything like that. It's just that muscle.
Your heart's pumping all that oxygen to the working muscles. So it's going to increase in its output as well. So is that because, is it a cardiovascular function, or, what's the limiting factor? Right. Is it a cardiovascular limiting factor, or is it a muscular endurance limiting factor? And the single leg strength endurance is obviously a huge component. So, I mean, you can see it like if you do sets of 20 back squats or front squats, you're going to be breathing. Right. Yeah. You're definitely going to be breathing hard. And, like old school, like, Tom Platz, he's kind of legendary in his legs.
Oh yes.
And, Hatfield and some of these guys that would advocate real high rep back squat stuff. Like they've talked about it in a number of settings where it is a cardiovascular, like you are breathing hard, your heart rate's up, and all of these things, but it comes down to like you have to do strength training, you have to do some resistance training if you want to get that the whole picture. Right.
Yeah, it's just, again, longevity, as I get older, is something that I'm really focused on, but not just living that, as long as you can, but having the higher quality of life, the health span that goes along with that. And, that's emphasized, they're calling some of this like medicine 3.0. I think Dr. Peter Attia, kind of calls it that. But doing all of these things, the pillars of health, your strength, nutrition, putting all that together as more preventative, and looking and trying to make that, a healthy, enjoyable life for as long as you can, and not just living as long as you can if you're trapped in a chair or something. So. All right. Well, good stuff. So just want to remind everybody that hopefully you're listening on KRYZ 98.5 Low Power FM, Mariposa, California. Well, good discussion so far. Let's go back and talk a little bit about terms, though, just to kind of get everybody up to speed. So let's start out with equipment and, things you can use to do resistance training. The most obvious is, body weight or calisthenics, right? So, push-ups, pull-ups, burpees, air squats, anything like that, and those have been used for years and years and years. So, but it's a completely valid way of, training. If you don't have access to a gym or any equipment, maybe you're traveling, if you design it right, there's all kinds of progressions you can do with any of those exercises to make them more difficult.
Yeah.
So you can start with a push-up against a wall and, down to the point where you're, doing a full push-up with your, legs up, elevated up in the air to add more resistance and everything in between. So, body weight, there's two really good books I was going to mention later, but I'll mention them now, that I've used for a lot of calisthenic work. And that is one's called Convict Conditioning. So written supposedly, have you heard of that? I think the guy's name is Coach Wade.
I haven't heard of that one in particular, no, but that term is, I've heard the term before.
Okay. Yeah. With your job, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was supposedly written by a prisoner who, had no access to, anything, any equipment, and was able to just do calisthenics and get really fit. But another one, that's not convict related, is You Are Your Own Gym, which was another great book on calisthenics that I've bought and read and used quite a bit. So body weight, free weights, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, free weights. I mean, there's the sky's kind of the limit on free weights. Like the typical free weights are going to be barbells, dumbbells, those kinds of things. We usually would refer to something that's not on machine and not body weight as a free weight.
Right.
So like even you can get a little bit more delineated there with like dumbbells, kettlebells, and sandbags and this and that and stuff. But really, they're going to be kind of under the umbrella of all those are going to be like free weights.
Right.
One of the biggest differences between like a machine and a free weight is going to be like in a machine, it's very guided. You're one track of motion in that machine versus free weight. There's going to be a lot more range of motion, or not range of motion particularly, but like, if I'm doing a seated press in a machine, it's pretty much a one track deal.
Right.
If I'm doing a bench press with a free weight with a barbell, there's potential that bar can move in other angles and things like that. So
yeah, you get a little more muscle involvement doing stabilization with a free weight usually, right?
Yeah. I mean,
how you think of it, or
like honestly, like the arguments for and against free weights, it just depends on your goal.
Okay.
Like it depends on your goal. It depends on what you're trying to do. You can get a lot of secondary muscles involved in a machine if you're conscientious and specifically trying to like really focus on doing those things. But there is going to be some small, there, in my opinion, there's definitely some things that will have to happen in a free weight exercise where you are going to use a lot more stabilizing type muscles, like smaller muscles that would quite get involved if you were doing something in a machine.
Right.
Because again, like you're stabilizing something in space with an unlimited range of, degrees of motion. So you will have a little bit more stability work in the free weights, doing a Smith squat versus a proper back squat or front squat is going to engage different things.
Right.
So yeah, you will get a little bit more of those stability muscles.
And so, yeah. And, just to be clear on that. So a Smith machine, when you said a Smith squat, a Smith machine, right?
Yeah.
Which is, fixed plane. Whereas a back squat or a front squat, we're going to be talking about you putting a barbell on your back or on your front,
right,
which is again, the free weight there.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, yeah, and then, there's, machines, of course, which there's, all different types of machines. I mean, all the Nautilus machines, that, were done in a circuit, which we'll talk about in a minute, but, quite often done in a circuit, but, just any kind of machine that's designed to do a particular exercise with usually a weight stack that you can adjust, up or down. But there's like the old, remember Soloflex or Bowflex, some of those that actually use bands or bars.
Flex bar things.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so, and then, you mentioned a little bit, kettlebell, is technically kind of a type of free weight. Pavel is really big on kettlebell. He's a Russian, strength guy trainer. So
he's intense. He's very, very intense individual, but he's got great stuff on kettlebells for sure. If you want to go the kettlebell route, I always recommend, I was talking to a guy about this. He's really into kettlebells for, the simplicity and the mobility of it and like being able to carry it with them or take it some places and stuff. Obviously if you're flying, it's not going to do but the accessibility and the variations that you can implement with kettlebells, great stuff. And I always recommend like check out Pavel's stuff for sure if you're going to go down that road.
Just kettlebell swings and Turkish get-ups, they'll tax you with just a 35, 45 pound kettlebell. Obviously it depends on your current strength level, but there's a lot you can do with just a single kettlebell.
Yeah. And Turkish get-ups, I'm going to be going off on a tangent right now. Turkish get-ups is like one of my favorite staples to include in people's programs. Like all the time. Like it almost doesn't matter what your ultimate goal is. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sneak some Turkish get-ups in there because they're so beneficial. But we'll also not go down that
a little bit masochistic. They're tough, but and then even things like bands, and there's all kinds of different fitness equipment that you can get out there, but those are kind of the big ones, the free weights, the machines, body weight, and and again, I kind of put kettlebells off on its own thing, but it is a type of free weight as well. But so that covers equipment, but then kind of what do you do? What are your goals, I guess, is the next thing, and there's bodybuilding, that I mentioned before, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, circuit training. So, bodybuilding, that's getting big, getting big muscles, and low fat usually. I mean, when you think of a traditional bodybuilder.
Yeah. I always, when I'm thinking about these different kind of categories, I typically will kind of look at, real high level athletes in those categories. So like a high level bodybuilder, the main goal of bodybuilding competitions is to be as muscular as possible with, and then they score symmetry and all these other things, but as most muscular and least amount of body fat, right? Those are kind of the two major components of bodybuilding as a sport. Powerlifting as a sport, the only goal is how much weight can you lift? And the three primary lifts are squat, deadlift, and bench, not in that order. But so you're like, okay, maximal strength versus maximal muscle hypertrophy or building muscle mass. And then Olympic lifting is specific to two lifts, the clean and jerk. Arguably, you could say that's two lifts, but essentially the clean and jerk, and then the other being the snatch. So, you look at high level Olympic lifters, and that I would categorize as a high power output sport where you're lifting a significant amount of weight very quickly. So if you just look at the math on it, that's the exact definition of power, right? Force, distance, and speed kind of thing. And so if you're moving a maximal force over a set distance at maximum speed, you're talking power output.
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of look at those like bodybuilding, build muscle, lose body fat, powerlifting, strength, pure maximal strength. And then Olympic lifting is like this blurry line with strength and power, but primarily power.
Yep.
So,
yeah. So, those are kind of the, competitive type, terms that you might hear, and, things that, individuals, I mean, technically the exercises that I like to, do, are most closer to powerlifting, but I don't really consider myself a power lifter necessarily, but I like the bench, the squat, the deadlift, the shoulder press, or just the press,
That actually used to be press. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's fine.
Press used to be part of a powerlifting competition. It was press, squat, bench, deadlift. Again, not in that order. but the press became problematic because people were using techniques that were really hard to judge a set standard.
Right.
They would lean really far back and almost do like a standing bench press.
Oh, right. Wow.
So yeah, so it got a little wonky there. So they ended up kind of cutting out the press of the big three. So powerlifting today is primarily the squat, bench, and deadlift.
Right. Huh. Well, that was an interesting piece of trivia. I didn't know that.
Trivia.
And I'm glad you're here to do some of these definitions. You went over those really well. So yeah, the reason that I tend to like, exercises that are kind of powerlifting related is that they are compound movements, right? So generally they work a lot of different muscle groups for one exercise.
Yep.
A bench press, is going to use the chest, but it's also going to involve the shoulders a little bit, the triceps.
A lot of lat too.
Yeah.
A lot of lats.
And
when you really wrench down on that bench in a good proper bench format, you're using your lats to help stabilize the shoulder girdle.
Yep.
So you're pushing with your legs, your core's got to be tight, all that power's got to move through. I think of Bruce Lee and the water moving, but all that power's got to move from the ground into the bar. And if there's your core's not real rigid and strong, you're not getting maximum power into the bar, so or force into the bar. So It is a lot of muscles involved in just a bench press when you're doing it.
The same with the press. You've got and the squat, all of those. They use a lot of different muscles. At one time, so you can get a really effective workout in a short period of time by just selecting the right compound movements.
The hormone effect from lifting big lifts like squat, bench, deadlift, and press is bar none, right? Like you're doing if you do an isolated bicep curl, with the free weights or even on the machine, you're not going to get nearly the hormonal impact that you're going to get from doing a deadlift.
Right.
It's going to require a huge outpouring of all the great, beneficial hormones that we're all looking for: the dopamine, the serotonin, the norepinephrine, and then the sex hormones, specifically testosterone, IGF-1, GH. All these things are going to be flooding through. So the hormonal impact is another really, really big piece from doing these big compound movements.
Sure. And so, yeah, that's, kind of my, another reason why I really like the big compound movements. And I've got a couple of programs I like that I'll talk about in a minute, but, and then those are compound movements, and you kind of talked about like the bicep curl, right?
Yeah.
And so those are more what's called an isolation exercise. You see those used a lot in, bodybuilding, especially, right?
Yeah, you see them, powerlifters too, like Westside Barbell is probably one of the more notorious or infamous, powerlifting gyms out there. Louis Simmons was an absolute genius, and it's a shame that he's no longer with us. But his impact on strength training and just maximal force production, and Chuck Vogelpohl, a lot of guys that come out of Westside Barbell and stuff, like the primary, they do a lot of what he called assistance work.
Okay.
And some of that would be considered, I guess, isolation type exercises, but it was like, when you're going for a max deadlift, you got to protect the elbow joint, you got to protect the shoulder joint, you got to protect the knee joints, the hip joints and stuff. And so you might still be doing these isolation type exercises around these particular joints to fortify these joints when you go to do the big movement, right? And so good mornings and bicep curls, you see these like Brian Shaw doing bicep curls, and like, why, he's not in it for the competition of like the aesthetics of his bicep, but he's doing it, a lot of those guys are doing it to kind of fortify their body to be able to do the big compound movements and throw heavy weights over their head and stuff like that, like Brian does in strongman. But so you can kind of break things up from compound movements, which is going to be multi-joint, multiple planes of motion kind of stuff, and then sometimes they're single planes of motion, but you get the idea. So big multiple joints, and then isolation is where you're kind of isolating one joint in particular.
Right.
So that's how I kind of separate in my mind the difference between like an isolation exercise and a compound exercise.
Great definition. Yeah. So, again, an isolation exercise might be a bicep curl or a tricep extension or, a leg curl, even maybe. So some of those types of things versus, a squat or a bench press or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
multiple joints involved in the squat. You got, ankle, knees, and hips. And then like a bicep curl is going to be primarily the elbow joint, one joint. You're still going to get, when you're doing real heavy tricep extensions, you might still get some core,
right.
might still get some, if your shoulders are up, you might be getting some trap in there too. Like it's not exactly isolating the one particular muscle, but it's not as many joints as a compound lift, right? So it's a little bit of sometimes there's some gray in there, but you get the idea.
And then, and again, we've talked a lot about this. Some of this, we've talked about like the professional bodybuilders and powerlifters and things like that. So we'll bring this back around to, everyday, people looking to start this here in a minute. The last thing I kind of want to talk about is, kind of sets and reps and programs, right? Mm-hmm. So, just so we're all on the same page definition wise. So, a rep is just a repetition, right? It's doing one movement one time as one rep, right?
Yep.
Then doing a series of those at one time would be a set.
Yes.
So if you did 5 of the same movement in a row, up, down, whatever it might be, 5 squats, 5 bench presses, 5 push-ups, 5 kettlebell swings, whatever it is, that's 5 repetitions. And then that's one set. And so usually, quite often, if you're doing a kind of a traditional workout, you might do a set and then take a little break. There is something called circuit training where you do a set of one particular exercise and then you move on to immediately to do another exercise, a set of another exercise. Mm-hmm. So you generally design a program around the exercises you're going to do, how many sets of each exercise you're doing, and then the number of repetitions in each set that you're going to do. Is kind of the basics for designing a program. And then exercises will vary depending on, days of the week. You're not going to lift just once a week. So do you do the same thing, work out the same program 3 days a week? Or are you doing, there's something called like push pull legs.
Yeah.
So the
bro split.
Right. One day where you're doing, shoulder press and bench press and that. Yeah. And then a second day where you're doing the pulling motions, which are, back and bicep related. And then a third day where you're doing your leg work, and quite often you'll have a rest day in between those. But, so again, programs vary quite a bit. But I just want to get those terms out there for people so they knew, repetition set program, kind of what we're talking about there. So,
when it comes to program design, and the reps and sets and rest periods and, total volume being, if I do the math and say, okay, if I did 5 repetitions of back squat at 100 pounds for 5 sets, and I did that, 3 days a week, which would be quite a bit.
Right.
I would, multiply that out, find the sum of how much total weight did I move over the course of the week. And that would be like a measure of volume.
Okay. So,
the reps and sets and rest period and volume are very goal dependent, very, very goal dependent. So, in the NSCA textbook, or Mel Siff's book that he co-wrote called Super Training. Those two are probably there's not a whole lot more new stuff than you're going to find within those 2 textbooks.
Okay.
So
hasn't
we haven't
Bibles
really,
are gold standards.
Yeah, they are absolutely foundational to any kind of training whatsoever. Aerobic, strength, flexibility, it doesn't matter. They're outlined in those 2 textbooks in some fashion. So between those 2 textbooks, what I'm getting to is the rep sets and specifically rest period. So reps if you're doing sets of 1 to 5 reps, you're going to be primarily in a strength zone,
right?
Primarily in a maximum force production, right? And sets of 5 to somewhere around maybe 12 to 15-ish, it kind of gets blurry out there. You're going to be in a muscular growth zone, or hypertrophy,
Hypertrophy.
muscular hypertrophy. Now you can get in the weeds on that. You can get real deep in the weeds on that portion because there's different theories of how muscular hypertrophy actually works. Just to give you an example, there's a real radical theory that Hanny's a world champion coach for professional bodybuilders, very, very good at what he does. His theory is that by doing high volume, so really high on the rep scheme of 7 sets of 15, 7 sets of 12 to 15, you can actually stretch the fascia internally, which is a radical theory.
Okay.
Previous to Hanny's theories, it was kind of understood that the fascia doesn't really stretch like that.
Okay.
But he's saying that it does. There might be some research that suggests that actually might be happening.
Well,
so my point is, you can get real deep in the weeds on that section of strength training or lifting, and then sets of 15 to
100. No.
100. Yeah, 100 is kind of a good mark. That there's going to be different sections of muscular endurance on that end.
Right.
So obviously you're not going to be doing a whole lot of sets, because sets of 50 is going to be very, very taxing.
Right.
Cardio value, the muscular endurance section. So, and then the loading. So loading is a really, really big, important piece. Probably it's hard to argue which one's most important, but like the loading piece, how much weight should I have on the bar?
Yeah.
Has kind of been outlined in, again, those 2 books, Super Training and the NSCA textbook, Essentials of Strength Training, Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning. So the loading sets of 1 to 5, you want to be at least 80, I would argue 85% of your 1 rep maximum.
Right.
So this is kind of obviously dependent on finding how much can I lift for one, which is difficult to do on some lifts. Very difficult to do on any lift, really. But so you want to be heavy enough so that 85%, you should be able to do about 5 reps at that load. And then obviously you're going to have to take a break at 5. So same with the rep ranges of 6 to 12 to 15. You want to be 80% if you're going to be right around the 5-6 rep range, and then obviously it's going to be a little bit lighter as you
do it more,
as you extend out. Yeah.
Sure.
So there's some charts and stuff you can look at, and then you can kind of figure out like how much weight you should lift. But the starting place is if my target rep range is 5, and I warm up, I'm feeling good, and I do 10. Obviously that's too light. Right. That's too light by quite a bit. So you can simply kind of guess and check and see, where you're at and stuff. You can do it mathematically. There's lots of different ways to slice that up, but just starting off, I would say, there's a lot of research on 3 sets of 10, which is why there's, such a dominant focus on just doing 3 sets of 10. It's a very standard. Ironically, that puts you right smack in the muscle hypertrophy zone. So you're going to be building muscle, which I always find a lot of women will typically have a fear of lifting weights because they don't want to get big and bulky. Actually
talked about that on our last episode with Sharon Whitefawn and Jenny Kaiser. But yeah, there is that fear out there for I don't want to get super big. And to be honest, I wish it was that easy. I really wish it was that easy, because I would be jacked. Right? Like if I just accidentally got too big. It takes a lot of work, a lot of dedication, a lot of time to get big muscles. So I would encourage women to not be afraid of that. It doesn't quite happen like that. If it was so easy, every high school kid in America would be, walking around 6 foot wide.
They would just be jacked out of their minds. So, there's a lot of like, so to kind of dial it back so that it's not overwhelming for beginners, because I think that's
right. Yeah, I was going to try to bring it back around for people here.
Starting off with 3 sets of 10 is a great place to start, or 5 sets of 5. Is a great place to start. 5 sets of 5 repetitions of whatever lift you're doing, and then progressively, every month, add some weight. And that's kind of where you start. Just start with 5 by 5 or 3 by 10, add some weight until you get comfortable, until you get a better understanding of your body, the movement, and you build that consistency, so you know how to do the lift. Now you've got some consistency, and now we can start ramping up the intensity piece, adding weight, adding speed. Obviously speed on lifts is different, but yeah, that would be the kind of the starting place. If you're just feeling it out, throw some weight on there, do 5 sets of 5.
Yep.
If that was too light, add some weight.
Mm-hmm.
If that was too heavy, take some weight off the bar. So that's where
adding the weight, is progressive overload is, what it's called, right? So you can't just, okay, I can bench, 200 pounds, and that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Right. It's not a bad thing necessarily. At least you're, getting some exercise in, but, it's always good to try and push ourselves a little more, get that overload, try to go to 205 pounds or whatever. And that's going to be age dependent and individual dependent and goal dependent, of course. But, that's kind of the concept where you're talking about, add some weight, in a month or whatever, is that progressive overload. And the reason we do that is that the body adapts, and it gets easier to do that same way.
Yep.
So
yeah, there's early research into stress and adaptation and stuff. One of the ways I conceptualize it that was kind of presented to me was if you think about it like a suntan. And so sunlight is going to, for people with fairer skin, you're going to develop a suntan as kind of a protection to the sunlight, and not getting overly bombarded with the sun. But that would be an appropriate adaptation to the sunlight, right? So, but you can have a maladaptation to the sunlight if the sunlight is too long in duration and too intense,
right?
So that can cause 3rd-degree sunburn. You can get nerve damage. It can be so bad. So there's an appropriate level of stress that you want to continue to add so that your body can respond to it and adapt to it. But it's not so much in duration and intensity that you can't adapt to it, because you're going to maladapt and you're going to have de-stress. So you have eustress and de-stress, and that would be a maladaptation to the stress. So you want to progressively overload just outside of your proximal, I forget the phrase for it. It's a zone of a proximal adaptation, I think is the phrase. But it's
we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. It's you want to stress it just enough to cause a positive adaptation, get a little bit stronger, grow a little bit more muscle mass, or go a little bit further in your run, or something along those lines. Right. But not so much that you're just completely unable to make that adaptation and it causes problems for you. So
yeah, you don't want to get into injuries and all that type of thing. And it's an important thing to remember too. Remember, this is all for discussion, folks. Always check with your trainers, your doctors, nutritionists, whoever that you trust, that you have in your life, that's a qualified professional to give you personal advice on your personal situation. Because there's a lot that can go into this, and there's science to it. There's a reason that there's certifications and training and all this that people go through in order to be able to do this like you have. Most people in our audience are not looking to be professional bodybuilders or powerlifters or Olympic weightlifters or anything like that. So let's kind of bring it back around. So you start talking about 3 sets of 10, and again, this is not an individual recommendation for anybody, but just a generic, kind of a strength or resistance training program for somebody who's going to walk into a gym, where, 3 sets of 10 is what we talked about there, but, kind of exercise. Are we doing the whole body, or, there's obviously a few ways to do it, but let's give people, just a little, thing that they can start with, and then, or not individual start with, go find a personal trainer. Yeah. Say that again. But yeah. So Steve, what's your kind of advice or thoughts there?
Yeah, that's that, to be honest, it's a hard question to answer without, seeing the person, getting a sense,
goals and
and then getting a sense too of their quality of motion. Do you have any injuries? How's your shoulder? How's your knee? How's your hip? How's your back? There's a lot that goes into that. So I'll make it really generic.
There you go.
So my process, I'll typically sit down with somebody if I'm meeting for the first time, if I don't know them, know their history and stuff, and we'll sit down and we'll kind of talk about, goals, pre-existing stuff, medical conditions and stuff. And I'm not trying to gather that information to diagnose any issues. Mm-hmm. Obviously I'm not qualified to do that. I'm not a PT, I'm not an MD. So it's just for me to understand, okay, there's a nagging shoulder issue going on. What does your PT suggest you do for your shoulders? Okay, let's incorporate some of that. Because, like we all do, we don't follow through on a lot of those things. Like
Right.
you got a shoulder injury, you're supposed to do these and this and this, and you're like, yeah, I'll do it. But so
And life gets in the way or something, right?
So I'll try to get a sense of like, do you have any injuries, joints, issues, things like that, and then I'll typically look at, how often you're coming in, how often do you want to work out, how often are we going to be one-on-one, and generally speaking, I like to see weight training, resistance training of some sort, whether that's kettlebells, dumbbells, free weights, machines, etc. I want to see strength training 2-3 days a week,
Okay.
and then just walking the other days.
Right.
That's it. And if that's too much, then I'll start with just walking.
Okay.
The health benefits of walking are profound. So especially if you can, what I call task stacking. So if you're going to like eat a healthy dinner with the family and then go for a family walk, you're multiple birds with the one stone.
Right.
Like you're stacking together this social, relational, health wise. You're teaching your kids healthy lifestyle habits and things like that. So it's a phenomenal little thing to do. And it doesn't have to be extravagant. It doesn't have to be super far. It doesn't have to be intense. None of that. It's just like go walk for 10, 20 minutes.
Get a little movement in.
Move a little bit. So depending on how deconditioned a person is, it might just be go for a 5-minute walk, 3-4 days a week, or and try to build up to that. But I'd really like to see at least 2 to 3 days of strength training or resistance training and the walking and kind of start from there. As people progress and people advance, then, because most people are not going for competitions in some of these earlier categories we're talking about, like bodybuilding, powerlifting, Olympic lifting.
Right.
The goal is general physical preparedness so that you can go run a 5K,
right?
And you're like reasonably fit enough to run a 5K, reasonably fit enough to do a pull up or two. So your general physical preparedness, you can do lots of different things. And so we're avoiding the specific physical preparedness and specific sport specific type stuff. So in that case, we're going to do a little bit of everything. So we'll start looking at building, doing some strength training, some hypertrophy training, some power training, and then some recovery work and things like that. So we'll kind of get a little bit of everything over the course of a week. So we're not overloading one energy system. We're not overloading one muscular system. We're not overloading any one particular thing. We're getting a broad spectrum of things over the course of a week. But the start, try to lift 3 days a week and walk 3 days a week.
Excellent. Great advice. I know there's people out there. It's like, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
That's the baseline, folks. And then from there, get with your personal trainer, have them work around any issues you might have, help you work on your goals, what you need to do to meet those goals. And then, like we talked about in our first episode, you create the processes, and systems to, eventually meet those goals. Excellent. Well, this has been a great discussion. A couple of recommendations. Again, I did talk about some books that I really liked. The Convict Conditioning book, the You Are Your Own Gym book. Another one, Tim Ferriss, famous podcaster, has a question that he asks a lot of his guests is, what's the book that you've gifted the most to people?
Oh.
And so for me, it's one called Younger Next Year.
Okay.
And it's all about, health and fitness and wellness, and trying to actually, at least decrease our biological age, if not our physical age, or our health age. I can't remember what that term is. I'll put that in sentence too. But yeah, so you're trying to be younger than what your physical age is, and so it's got some great advice in there. It's really motivating. There's a Younger Next Year for Women specific version as well, but they're the books that I've gift the most. So I'll recommend. Obviously, there's lots of great things out there, but that's one that I've gifted the most to to people and really, really enjoy it, especially people, who are getting up there, 40s, 50s, 60s. It's been a great book. So you got any recommendations for us this week, Steve?
So yeah, well, a lot of the books that I typically gravitate towards are real technical. So I don't know if I would recommend some of those books, like Super Training and even the NSCA textbook. Like those are textbooks, right? Like they're not. You don't sit down and read a chapter for fun. Those are kind of textbooks. But that's an interesting question that Tim Ferriss asked. I like that question a lot. But the book that I gift the most is actually not fitness related at all.
Bring it on. Let's hear it.
So I studied political science, and it was mostly a philosophy coursework in my undergraduate work and stuff. And so the book that I gift the most is actually a Stoic philosophy book written by Epictetus, or attributed to Epictetus's writing, called the Enchiridion, or the Discourses. So it's a very, very practical book, and the other one along the same vein is Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Right, very powerful.
So Marcus Aurelius is actually. That's a because I'm going to go on a tangent here. No, I love the stuff. But Marcus Aurelius's book, Meditations, is actually a journal that he was writing to himself with no intention of it being published for the public. And it's a phenomenal read, because here you have the arguably most powerful emperor at the time, and he's at war for quite a bit of his reign. And he's writing notes to himself to remind himself of, who he is. And he's just a man. He's so how to process all these things, and death, and the struggles that we all go through as human beings.
Right.
Aging, getting sick, loved ones dying.
He lost several children, and so,
and I'm pretty pissed that he handed down his empire to his son. So, he was not prepared for that leadership.
Right. Yeah. Know your history there, folks. It's a great story, but a sad story.
My favorite. Well, you kind of get a glimpse of it in the movie Gladiator.
Right.
So fictionalized version, but yeah, Meditations, and he's quoting a lot from Epictetus. Epictetus was a slave, freed, and became a teacher.
Right.
And taught Stoicism, and it's kind of technically, I think, the middle Stoicism. There's an earlier version, but Epictetus had a massive impact on Marcus Aurelius and Seneca.
Right.
So those are the two books that I gift the most by far. Is Discourses and Meditations.
I think I have 3 translations of Meditations, different translations in my office there. And it's a great book. Good recommendation. I love that a lot.
Very practical. It's not bent towards any one particular religion. It's more of a philosophical outlook and how to approach the difficulties of life. And in fact, again, I can go on. I could talk about this one, but cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. I think it was Aaron Beck, if I'm not mistaken. Was CBT is predominantly Stoic influence.
That I did not know. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very Stoic ideology, ideas in CBT. So.
Excellent.
A little tip.
All right. Good stuff. So fun tangent, but it's all related.
It's all one piece.
Right. Yeah. The mind, body, spirit all together. So, all right. We'll talk a couple upcoming events here. We do have the Paseo de Mariposa coming up on Sunday, April 28th. It's one of those running things. I know. Yeah. But I'm going to do the 5K. But there's a 5K, an 8K, and a 12K-ish, I think, route. As well as a shorter, they've got a kids route as well, that I think is just a lap around the courthouse or something like that.
My speed right there.
But that's Sunday, April 28th. And we'll put a link to sign up in the show notes. And then they're also doing a Grizzly Dash obstacle course race on April 29th. And that'll be at the Mariposa Fairgrounds. And that's a fundraiser for the local sports teams.
Okay.
For like jerseys and things like that. So
cool.
Good to come out and support the community on that, and have a little fun and sweat a little too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say if you're capable and willing, come out and run, man, because that time will pass in your life
Right.
if you're not capable and willing to do it.
Yep.
So,
All right, Steve, remind everybody, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
best way to get in touch with me is through the Facebook business page, Steve Duggar Coaching.
Okay.
That's just reach out to me on there. Happy to help answer any questions whatever you need.
Excellent. All right. Well, if you'd like to be a guest or sponsor an episode, have any questions you'd like to us try and get answered for you, or just have some feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at show@yosemite.fit. The more feedback we get, the better the show will get. We want to give you, what you want to hear about. So that's the best way to get in touch with us, I think. Also, don't forget the new website, yosemite.fit. The business directory, the event page is there. Both of those events will be out there. That's it for this show. Again, another great episode. Hopefully, you guys got some great information out of there. Just a reminder, you've been listening on KRYZ 98.5 Low Power FM, Mariposa, California. Thank you very much. We hope to see you in the next show.